Okay, in this session, after your cup of coffee or cup of tea or whatever you want to do here, we're going to jump into Monopoly. We've just come off of a discussion of perfect competition. And under perfect competition, we said there are so many producers and there's so many consumers that there's no one entity out there that can manipulate supply or demand. And so we said that we had a demand curve that is perfectly elastic or infinitely elastic. So perfect competition is one side of the economic spectrum, and monopolies on the other side of the economic spectrum. So they're two extremes. And I have to mention that they are two intellectually abstract models that don't really exist in reality. Let's take perfect competition, for instance. We said that everybody's making exactly the same thing. But is there ever anything that is exactly the same product as any other product? This is not a marketing class, but in your marketing class, they typically talk about the 4 Ps, that you've got the product itself, the physical product, and then you have to have some place for that product, and you put a price on that product, and you promote that product, put an image in people's mind as to what they can expect from that product. So in that context, in a marketing context and an economic context, is there any such thing as a product that is exactly the same as any other product? And common sense would say, well, sure there is. Sure. Let's take automobiles, for example, just as an example. Let's say that there is a run of automobiles coming down the line, and the specification for those automobiles for this run is exactly the same color, same interior, same engine, same tires, same carburetor, same, one right after another. And somebody wants to buy one of those sequence of cars. And they say, well, before I buy this car, could you tell me what day of the week this car went down the assembly line? Well, we got computers that log everything, I suppose. Why? Well, I don't want one that was made on a Friday. And I don't want one that was made on a Monday. Why? Well, at least in this person's mind, what's on people's minds on a Friday? Are they thinking about a perfect job here, or are they thinking about the weekend that's coming up? And their attention might not be fully focused on what they're doing. Similarly, a Monday is people just had a wild weekend, and they're just barely coming back to reality after soaking in all that pleasure for the weekend, and they're just barely getting back to the groove. And so the highest quality of a car would be in the middle of the week. Maybe a hypothetical example, but to show that even in the minds of the consumer at least, this car, which has exactly the same specification, could be a different car in the mind of the consumer based upon their perception of how focused the workers are on their work as it goes down the assembly line. Let's take another one. Let's say that you're sitting there in this hypothetical classroom that I'm in, and you got the munchies. You'd really, really like a bag of potato chips. Well, down the hall here, you can go to the vending machine and you can get a bag of potato chips. Or you could walk outside, get in a car, and drive a quarter of a mile and get the exact same bag of potato chips. It was made on the same day. It's the same size. Now, the price might be different, but let's just say the price is the same. Normally, you can get it cheaper in the grocery store than you can get it in a vending machine, but let's just say the price was the same. If the price was the same, now are they the same product? Well, even now they're not the same product because of location, place. you can go over there and you can get it, and you can be back in your seat in a matter of 5 minutes, where otherwise it's going to take you 10, 15 minutes. Go out and get in your car. You've got to spend money for gasoline, wear and tear in your car, go get this, walk around, find it. In other words, it's not exactly the same product. Even though it comes in the same package, if I held them up here, you couldn't tell the difference between one and the other. But because of place or price or perception, they're not the same product. Some people will go to buy a stereo or a flat screen TV or a computer, and it might be the exact price online here versus over here. But the consumer says, these people have a really good return policy. And these people, I'm reading online, that these people have a terrible return policy. So is it exactly the same product? And the answer is no. Part of the product is the return policy and the consumer service after you buy the product. My point being here is that perfect competition, in which we're talking about having exactly the same product, only exists in theory. Perfect competition is an extreme that only exists in theory, but it's a good benchmark. Now, similarly, monopoly is a situation that only exists in theory. There's no such thing as a pure, absolute monopoly, just like there's no such thing as a pure, absolute situation of perfect competition. Normally when we're talking about perfect competition, we try to come up with some sort of examples like wheat berries. Wheat berries. Those are little berries of wheat. And they grow them. And so a berry of wheat, which is one of those things that they take the chaff off of, you got a berry of wheat. Oh, wheat berry is a wheat berry, right? What could be different? Nature makes a wheat berry, it's a wheat berry. But, as I learned from my wife, no, wheat berries are not all wheat berries. There's hard winter wheat and there's soft spring wheat, and one is good for pastries and the other is good for bread, and so not all wheat is the same kind of wheat. So even within the genre of wheat, there are differences of product. And so there's really, and wheat's usually one that usually a lot of books bring up, but my wife tells me they are different products, and she wants one for one purpose and another one for a different purpose. Before we expand on why there is no such thing as a perfect monopoly condition, let's just talk about the word for a second. Monopoly. Monopoly. Mono means one. And poly comes from the word, I think it's a Latin word, polis. Like Indianapolis or Minneapolis or Annapolis. And this means marketplace. And so you put the two words together and you have one marketplace. If you want to go buy something, or if you want to go sell something, there's only one place to go where you can find a market, a buy and a sell, market for that good. So the word monopoly comes from one marketplace. So for stocks and bonds, there's only really one place to go, and that's Wall Street. You need to go to Wall Street if you want to trade that particular kind of commodity. So a monopoly means one seller. One seller or one market or one marketplace. So if you want to do any business there, you've got to be that one seller, because if you don't buy it from that one seller, you don't get it at all. They're the only one that sells that particular commodity. So let's try to think of an example here. Once upon a time, after I think it was Davy Crockett went through the Appalachian Mountains, and you could either walk through there, which he did, or you could bring a mule with you, and that was helpful. And pretty soon you could make a trail, and you could have a Conestoga wagon go through there. But at one point in time, somebody came up with the idea to make a railroad through the pass, which you could ride a railroad, not a stagecoach or wagon. You could take a railroad from the East Coast all the way over to Ohio. through the Appalachian Mountains. Now, if that was the only railroad through the Appalachian Mountains, would they have a monopoly or not? Well, in one sense, yes, they would have a monopoly because they would be a sole seller of rail transportation from the East Coast toward the Midwest. But is that the only way to get from the East Coast to the Midwest? Well, no, there's the old way of walking or Conestoga wagon or riding a horse or something. And so although they would have a monopoly on rail transportation, they didn't have a monopoly on the transportation process of getting people through the mountains. So there was more than one option. And it's just simply because they have a monopoly, they cannot charge any price they want. Now, I've got to back up for a second and qualify that. If a person produces a good, and they are the only producer of that good, can they charge whatever price they want for their good? If it's their good, if they own it, can they charge whatever price they want for their own personal property? The answer is, well, yeah, it's theirs. If they want to charge $1 million for it, it's theirs. They can say the price is $1 million, take it or leave it. Or they could charge $1 a piece. But for a monopolist, and if it's not something that's really, really exotic, if they charge $1 million a piece, there's not very many people that are going to buy that product. And so it's not in their best interest to charge a price that is so high that they get virtually no buyers. On the other hand, it's not in their best interest to charge a price that's so low that they're making this like crazy, but they're not making very much money because the price is so low. It's probably close to their cost of production. They're not making any money. But there's some place between $1 million and $10 where they're going to make more money than any other price level that they could pick. So we're going to apply, under this monopoly topic, our profit maximization rule to the condition of a monopolist, just like we did before under the condition of perfect competition. Let me say something else in passing before we get to the two barriers to entry. Two barriers to entry. The free market abhors monopolies. And we'll graph this out in a later section. It abhors monopolies because monopolists have an instinct. They have an instinct. And their instinct is, since I'm the owner seller of this, I've got these people who really want it over a barrel. Therefore, I can charge a higher price than if I was in competition with somebody else who was also making this. Because if I charge a really high price, they're all going to go to my competition, and I would have to lower my price. But if I don't have any competition, I can have sustained economic profit that the free market drives out under perfect competition. Under perfect competition, the free market drives out economic profit, and it drives the price all the way down to the owners of these businesses. There's just enough left in the business to keep the owner doing that. They like their $60,000 or $80,000, $100,000 salary. But if they got any lower than that, they'd get out of the business and go be hired for more money than what they're making in this business. So the free market drives the price down and down and down and down till it's just the point that they're just on the edge of getting out of the business, and it leaves them stay right there. But who does that benefit? It benefits the consumer, because all consumers want the lowest possible price, where producers like monopolists want the highest possible price. And so the monopolists can push the price higher than a market level because they're the only seller. So what's going to keep out this competition so that the monopolists can maintain their economic profit, which the free market would tend to drive to nothing? Well, there are two barriers to entry. There's a natural barrier to entry of others getting into the market, and there's a legal barrier to entry. Economies of scale would be one example of a natural barrier to entry. that one firm put so much money into their factory and became so automated that nobody else can get into the business because they can't compete on price, and they don't have the money to match what this other firm has done, and therefore they can't get into the business because they can't get the lower price and they can't get the efficiencies of scale. Another barrier to entry along the natural would be somebody just happens to be sitting on a bunch of oil, and you can't find that kind of oil anyplace else in the world. Then they would have a natural monopoly because they're sitting on a resource that no one else has. So there's natural barriers to entry which tend to give monopoly power. And notice I said it tends to give monopoly power because there's degrees of monopoly power. The other kind of barrier is a legal barrier. A legal barrier would be a patent, a trade secret, a government protected status. It could be some sort of robotic equipment that the government doesn't want anybody else to get in that business for defense purposes, and so they give this one company the exclusive right to produce this product because they only sell to the government. Although this word is not in your text, that would be a monopsony situation. Monopsony, when there's only one buyer, that's a monopsony. When there's only one seller, that would be a monopoly. So the government might give a monopoly condition because they're in a monopsony. You're not allowed to sell this to anybody else because we don't want anybody else to have this sort of technology. But the free market is always trying to find a way to get into and break up these monopolies because of this huge economic profit that's in there. Intellectual property rights are probably the strongest legal barrier to entry, where the government says you came up with an idea, and technically the patent office is not supposed to patent ideas, they're only supposed to patent things. But that line has gotten very, very murky, very, very murky. And so now we're patenting different forms of DNA and different combinations of genes and all those sorts of things. Some of which might be in your body, and so a corporation might own part of your body because that might be part of the genetically modified stuff that you ate today, and so some corporation at some point in time might have a claim on you of violating their intellectual property rights, and that's a very interesting topic which I wish I could go into, but I don't really want to go into right now. But what I want to say, there's two kinds of barriers, natural and legal. And the only way that companies can get a long-standing, long-life monopoly is with a legal barrier. Because with a natural barrier, everybody's digging into technology and figuring out ways that they can do the same thing or accomplish the same thing to get away from this exploitive monopolist, because the monopolist's instinct, since their buyers have no choice but to come to them and get the product, their instinct is to raise the price because consumers don't have any choice. Now that brings us to the first major difference here between our cost structure of the firm. Let me use a different color. I'll use black. Under perfect competition, we said that the price level, the demand, the marginal revenue was perfectly elastic. That we wouldn't raise the price because we wouldn't sell a thing, because there's so many competitors out there. We'd be dumber than two rocks to lower the price. But for a monopolist, the demand curve is back to our traditional shape of downward slope. Because if the monopolist raises the price and raises the price, then the quantity demand is going to get lower and lower and lower and could go all the way to zero. But if the monopolist lowers the price, they're going to be able to sell a greater quantity. So there's some price out there at which this monopolist is going to make more money, more profit than any other price they could pick. So the first big difference is the demand curve has a downward sloping curve. The next thing we'll notice here is that the marginal revenue curve no longer lies on the demand curve. The marginal revenue curve now has a slope that's twice as steep as the demand curve. And this will happen this way every time. So if we drew this out so the demand curve crossed the x-axis here, let's say at 8, then we would know right off the bat the marginal revenue curve is going to cross that same axis at a point of 4 because the curve will be twice as steep as the demand curve. So when we look at this and we say, okay, we're going to have a marginal cost, I mean, a monopolist has fixed cost. A monopolist has variable cost. A monopolist has average total cost. And a monopolist has marginal cost. And if their marginal cost curve is like this, a monopolist is going to follow the exact same profit maximization rule as anybody else in the universe, and they're going to want to operate where the marginal cost curve intersects with the marginal cost curve, and they would be, let's say, at 3, if this is in thousands, 3,000 units. So what price is this monopolist going to pick? It's not going to pick this price right here, as it was under perfect competition. At an output of 3, the monopolist will pick the price off of the demand curve, and the monopolist will pick that price right there. Why? Because at this price, they will be operating where the output is exactly where the marginal revenue curve crosses the marginal cost curve.